Well, on the handout, Roman numeral 8, if you remember examples of prescriptive or normative ethics, and these are various ways that we think about what we ought to do, and I covered pretty briefly one way of doing it, suggested is called ethical egoism, and that's when you say, what is best for me? And there are different kinds of ethical egoism. What's best for me? I did some criticism of that. I'm not going to spend much time on that, as I told you before, because it seems pretty obvious to me that that is incredibly unchristian, and so I want to go that direction because we're at, well, here Hill Church, and I'm a Christian, so I don't find that persuasive. Then we moved on to something called deontology. Deontology, remember, deon in Greek means duty, and in essence, deontology is what's the right thing to do? They're going to say, what are the rules? What are the rules? A deontologist is going to say, what are my duty? What are the rules? So that's always concerned about that. A deontologist, they list a bunch of different options. Well, you have all kinds of different duties. We talked about possible rules, about respecting property, about on and on and on. We talked about deontology. Then we said, okay, there are two major issues with deontology. The first major issue is, which rules do we follow? Which one do you base your morality on? And Christians disagree on this, but it is the first important question. If you're going to say follow rules, it matters that you know which ones you're picking. And you're going to have people like Immanuel Kant, and we talked about him some, and his suggestions. Some people say that's exactly what you should follow. Others say they're doing biblical rules. That's fine, but you first have to choose them. So if I choose certain rules and Jennifer says, I choose these rules, and Julia says these rules, we can all be deontologists, but come to different conclusions of what we think the right thing to do, predicated upon the rules we follow. Maybe Bonnie says, I follow the rules my parents taught me. And then Red says, I follow the rules I learned from TV. We can just pick up rules wherever we are, but deontologists, ethicists usually make arguments of why they think their rules should be the universalized ones. And in general, frankly, if you read a deontologist, they're not that different. It's not as if you read they're radically different. You won't find some that are radically different. They're pretty similar. But that's the first major issue on that. Okay, that's what we finished up last week. Any question or comments about that? Last week, someone said, or 2 weeks ago, I really like your class. I learned a lot. I don't follow all of it, but I'm glad I'm there. So I'm glad you're here too. Hope you follow it more. Hopefully over time it clicks with you. The second major issue when it comes to is the applicability of rules. Now this is the part I really like the most. How do you apply the rules you've chosen? How do you apply the rules you've chosen? And so, for example, there's different things. For example, we talk the meaning of the rule itself. So what is the meaning of the rule? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? Let's say I follow that as a rule. Jesus said, Mark 12:31, love your neighbor as yourself. There's my rule. What does that mean? So when it comes to a rule, we're going to ask, what does it mean to love? And this is radically different. I've done podcasts and YouTube stuff on this. Out in the quote-unquote real world out there, Jack, a normal non-Christian is going to say, oh, clearly that means to accept them as they are and accept their behavior. Right? In general, that's exactly what if you live in America, that's exactly what it means. That's not what Jesus meant. But we can both be a pagan deontologist and a Christian deontologist and say it's good to love our neighbor, but fundamentally disagree on what it means to love them. But that matters. Christians themselves disagree on what rules mean. We agree they should matter, the rules, but they disagree on their meaning. And then they're going to come into, okay, how do you decide what it means? Well, you do pick and choose. What I find most persuasive is historical and literary context. Others don't. Others will say my culture decides, my church decides, my pope or my bishop decides. I'm a Protestant. I say Scripture decides based on historical context. So, and then even then we can have different views. So first is, what does it mean? Deontologists have to figure that out. Two, and that's what we call the weight of the rule. What is the weight of the rule? That is, once the meaning is determined, is it applied all the time in the same way? There are various weights to rules, and we all know this. You just never said it this way, but we all do it. We all do this. So one weight of the rule is what we call absolute weight. Absolute means, like in the South we say, hell will freeze over. What? What? Odal way. Oh, total weight. Yeah, total weight, absolute, total. So an absolute is when rules are absolutely binding in every single situation. So some might say an absolute, the way it would be like abortion. They would say you cannot kill a human being because it's absolute. It never ever happened, which means even if the mother was raped, even if the mother's about to die, if they said you're supposed to preserve human life and that's an absolute rule, abortion is never okay. It's an absolute rule. Or Roman Catholics would say contraceptives is an absolute rule. You must not use those because you're blocking God's giving of life and so forth. That depends. Um, that's an absolute rule. Just because of time, I won't do this, but I taught this class in a classroom setting. I used to ask students, I would say, what are some rules you think are absolute that you would never break ever, ever? And you write them on the board. And they're usually pretty similar. But if you think about that for a second, somebody would say rape. I'll say, would you rape someone if it saved 1,000 people? And those would say, no. Would you rape someone if it saved 1,000,000 people? If you say, no, I will never rape, you're just going to 1,000,000 people. So there's your absolute rule. That is, there's nothing you could make me do. Would you rape someone you loved if they were going to kill your family in front of you? You say, well, that's not absolute. Absolute means you don't break it. No matter what you make, no matter the context, I won't break it. That's an absolute rule. It is not broken, can't be broken. Then we have something called prima facie, which in Latin just means at first view, at first face. That is, when rules are considered morally binding initially, at first view, unless another ethical choice must override the first rule. Then it's well, in general, yes, unless something has to override it. So how do we know when we should override the rule with another one? Well, when there are better reasons for the other choice than for the prima facie one, and these reasons can be defended publicly. It's a last resort. We should seek the action that at least violates the principle being overridden. Usually involves feeling somewhat guilty for breaking the first rule and might involve apologizing. So, for example, if you're a deontologist and someone, this is the classic ones, someone comes up to your door and has a gun in your face and says, I'm going to kill everybody in your family. Are they inside? And they are inside. You have a couple options, right? One is, of course, to attack this, let's say it's a guy, attack the guy and beat him up or kill him. If you feel like the moral rule to defend your family, if you have the moral rule to kill him when you feel threatened, or you can maybe lie. You say, well, I have the moral duty to lie in the face of preserving human life. There's different moral values and rules going on. And so let's say a person says, since I believe the preservation of human life is an absolute rule and telling the truth is not, it's a close second or third, I want to tell the truth at all time unless something is weightier or bigger deal. That's preserving human life, which means I'm going to lie. I'll lie to preserve human life. I feel badly for lying because I broke a rule, but it's weightier, it's a more powerful rule, preserving human life, than not lying or telling the truth. Does that make sense? So prima facie at face value, yes, I always tell the truth, unless something needs to trump it. And that's what a lot of people do in life. I said to students all the time, would you steal medicine so your family could make it if someone was sick? Most students are like, yes. Let them pause. Yes. Would you hurt someone? Well, maybe. Would you kill them? That's usually students go, well, no. The point is why? And you can push them. Why? Because stealing, they think, is not as bad as. Preserving human property is not as valuable as preserving human life, and I don't want to take human life, things like that. The prima facie is, I think, where most people live. Then there's something you might call like the rule of thumb. That's just when rules provide general guidance. Like, you might say it's a general rule of thumb to tell the truth, leave a few minutes early in case there's traffic. Just in general, sure, yeah, but they're not massively moral things. But we all do it. Okay, I'll get a little footnote. Having been in, 3 million meetings to churches, one thing that causes a lot of disagreement amongst people groups and organizations and churches and nonprofits and for-profit organizations is that you have people talking about an issue, and I've only done this a couple times when they let me, if I'm the leader, I'll say, well, I think, and they just can't get around. And the assumption is if someone disagrees, they think your value doesn't matter. But what they're really disagreeing upon is the weight of the rule. I think we ought to do this. I think we ought to do this. I think we ought to do this. And you put these things on a board. I've done this. I'll say, now, if you just look at these things on a board, it's good that we serve the poor and da-da-da. And they're like, yeah. Now, which one of these things, ideas are bad or immoral? Well, no one raises their hand. They're not sinful. What we're disagreeing upon is which one's more important. That's called the weight of rules. Which one should we be doing more often? And that's where we're disagreeing with each other. So that way we can stop shaming someone else for having a different idea or thinking they think you're doing that to your idea. We're just disagreeing on which rules one we should follow here. But this is normal discussion on morality. It's just normal. That's what we should do. So can we agree if we had a triage which ones are the most important? And in leadership consulting, I would say the way to do that is you figure out what your vision is, and that becomes the way it helps you put things in order, especially you understand it. But in any case, these are what we do in life all the time. And we do this, if you're a deontologist even a little bit, you do it in the real world all the time. I mean, you just do it all the time. If you're at the grocery store, at work, your life is full of these ethical rules, and you're slowly triaging. I mean, at some point, you've triaged them. A tip here, we must be cautious of not allowing rules to outweigh the person involved or the reason why God gives the rule in the first place. That would be a warning for Christian deontologists. And of course, biblical examples, like the Decalogue, Ten Commandments and so forth, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, the ethical commandments in Romans 13, 8 to 10, on and on. Every time there is a do not and do this, one could establish a moral duty or a rule, every time. You could go through the Bible every single time it says don't do this, you got a rule, got another rule, got another rule, got another rule. Or do this, you got another rule. I want to pause there for a second and say, in a nutshell, and I mean in a nutshell, that's the issue of deontology. So what are questions, comments you have about deontological ethics? And while you're thinking, how many of you think you are a deontologist in general? Yeah, Julia, Greta, yeah? Yeah. Okay, so if someone were attacking your home and you killed the person to protect your family, and you killed the person, you wouldn't consider that murder. Okay, and so for you, the implication is because murder is right, but morally speaking, murder is okay. That's really bad, maybe. So, in your view, murder is worse than killing a person in defense, right? So you're triaging your rules. I can kill a person. I have the right to kill a person in self-defense. I don't have the right to kill a person for murder. Is that what I hear you saying? Gotcha. That is a typical view. Yeah. Who else? Any questions, comments? So the point is, if you try to rob her, you're going down. So if there's one thing you take from this study, not so much robbery. Just make it to your property. Oh, okay, not for robbery. They have to threaten your family. Saving your family. Whew. I wouldn't like it. Right. I would try not to react. Yeah. I'd try not to, but yeah. I'd run away. Amen. Yes, go ahead, Red. Gotcha. So Red wants to be shot in the butt with buckshot. Okay. So if there's one thing you took from this lesson, good. That's good to know. Thank you for that. Buckshots and Red. Anybody else want to be shot? Yes, ma'am. Oh, isn't it situational? You don't know what you do until you're in the situation. There's a thing called situational ethics that would decide that's right. So there's a degree to which the answer is yes, I think, but the exact question you asked, that you would not know what you would do. One situational ethics would say, we don't know until we're there. If that's what you mean, I disagree. If you mean I'm not exactly certain what I would do predicated upon the rules, I'm not fully aware of what I know or believe in, I agree with that. That is to say, you could have a bunch of rules already inside of you, and you just haven't thought about them much until the moment arises. Then you go, oh, now I realize, yeah, that rule is more important than that rule. I have found that true with people. If I ask them, I have students all the time, I'd say, why is that? And I put all the rules on the board, and they go, and then I start using that vocabulary. Oh, right, because the preservation of human life is my top. Oh, yeah, that's why I did that. Or ceilings below it, or I didn't think about it until this very moment, Dr. Pendergrass, and now I see, yeah, that's right. Some people say, no, you don't know at all until you're in a situation, and in that sense, I disagree with that. Because I think it's okay to make up our mind ahead of time. If you don't have time to think and you react, sure. You might mess up your own deontological view. Sure, sure. We're not. I don't think we're robots in that sense. But in general, deontologist at core is always asking the internal question, whether they think this or not. They are always being driven by what is the rule, what is my moral duty, and that duty is predicated upon something. Is it some teaching? Is it what mom and daddy taught me? Someone taught me this, or I just intuitively believe it. One of those two options. It's some at core, and that's why I do what I do all the time. And I hear all the time, why do you do that? Well, that's what my mom and dad taught me. I mean, that's right. That's the moral duty to obey mom and dad. Or why do you do that? To make them proud of me. I have the moral duty to make them proud. Therefore, I do blank. Why are you a hard worker? To make my dad proud. Why did you start that business? To make mom proud of me. That was the right thing to do. Make them proud. Therefore, I made that decision. Not make Jesus happy. Not the Spirit led me. Not because I want to make money. Not because I want to help my community. Because I want to make mom proud. That was a moral duty I had, make them proud. See, we do it all the time in life. Why'd you take over the family business? Because I wanted to avoid conflict with my father. Because it's a moral duty to avoid conflict because I can't handle it. I believe I can't handle it. And I have the moral duty to avoid conflict at all cost. So I don't want to disagree with people. Where do you get that rule from? I just have it. I mean, that's right. Counseling 101. I mean, all the time. We're driven by rules. Not all from Jesus. I'm saying we're driven by the sense of these rules in life I have. And you'll know by how you behave. And it does oftentimes take a lot. Well, in my experience, it always takes constant introspection. Which is why at the end of last week's session, for those of you here, I encourage you to think about why you do what you do throughout the week. Why did I just do that? Why did I let that person get in front of me in the lane? Why did I bite my lip instead of chewing that person out who deserves it? Why did I talk to that person that way? Why did I go to church? Why did I get dressed this morning?
When your wife was having Julia, did you speed on the way to the hospital?
Did I speed? I did not speed because we had a C-section.
Oh, good.
No, good question. Oh, we gotta hurry. It's like, David, slow down. You never know. I do know the appointments at 7. We had a bit of the crack of dawn. She had her nails all did, hair. Oh no, she's ready to go. Because Hayden was a C-section. Hayden turned breech the week before. The week before he turned, and he was out to there, and he turned all in. So we had to do C-section. Her. And after that, they encouraged her to do it again. So, yeah. Julie came out. Julie came out. Well, not for mamas. They taught them about stuff all the time. That's right. And right when the baby came out, I shot her in the rear end of the buck. Yeah. It worked. She became very obedient afterwards, Julie did. Any question about deontology? We're going to talk more about rules a little bit and Jesus later on too, but just to reflect on that. David, what about you? Good question. I tend to, by core, probably in normal routines of life, I'm a rule follower. Yep. As I understand them to be, I try to follow the rules as I understand them to be from Jesus. Secondly would be from the scholarship of healthy psychology. Those are my two major pools from which I draw my basic rules. And I think it's safe to say. Right. So if you learn rules and you live your life by those rules, it doesn't mean it's right. That's right. That's correct. Sure. All right. You could learn the rule that you're supposed to hurt people and despise them, and it's good to rule to do drugs when you can and get drunk when you can, and that's correct. Absolutely. That's right. And that's why deontologists try to make the argument, here are the rules you ought to follow. That's right. You're right. Yeah. Following a rule. That's right. I mean, SS guards follow the rules of the Nazis. Right. Following rules doesn't mean you're righteous. And when you go to when they went on trial, we were just following orders. Yeah, you're wrong to do so. Following rules does not make you righteous. That's for sure. Yeah. Right. So they would probably say a Nazi soldier would probably, yeah. So I would tell them, and this is what happened, right at the Nuremberg trials. They said we were following orders by our commanding officers, and we were being good soldiers, and we followed the law of Germany and Nazism. And the Nuremberg judge of the trial came back and they said, there is a law above German law called the law of morality, and you should have known better not to do that. And that's what they said. That was the exact argument. I mean, it's deontological ethics. It's basically saying the perseverance in human life beat being obedient to your commanding officer, which is a moral duty, but not when they're commanding something that's immoral. All right, so if I were talking, and me watching so many documentaries, if I were there and they were listening to me, I'd say the perseverance in human life is far more important than obeying your commanding officer who just said he'll kill those babies by slamming their heads against the wagons. No, I'm not doing that. But he said to, I don't care. You're saying to do something that is profoundly not as important as obeying your orders. That's right. I'm not just like I wouldn't go kill you or your family because no, I'm not doing that. And they would say, no, yes, you can. I'm a good soldier. I'm being obedient. Yeah, that's what they would say. Yeah. Right, that's right. They did not think Jews were, yeah, that's right, subhuman they call them. That's right. That's right. Right, oh yeah, that's right. And that's right. So I mentioned that before too. Yeah, so in the moment, a person who had been really bought into their ideology would say, David, we're not killing. You're saying the perseverance of human life. You're not killing human life. We're killing Jews. Right. In that sense, we're not talking about morality difference. We're talking about what I call facts. Facts. And so now we have to disagree on the facts. Then I would do my best to try to persuade them that that Jew is a human being, to appeal to them. And not every single version that I've heard from some, we're getting off topic, World War II scholars that the psychological toll on the guards was horrible. They had to go to prisons and get out psychopaths out of German prisons to help do the job because they were having a lot of them were having such a hard time with following orders. Because they all knew they're not vermin; they're human beings they're killing. As they're crying out, and all that to say, yeah. Yep, that's about the facts. So they would say, yeah, I was doing. To justify, yeah. They would say it's not murder. Yeah, back to facts. Well, it's the same thing with abortion. There's no distinction between that and abortion. If the fetus, if the zygote in a mother's womb is a human being, well, then you've just murdered it. If it's not, then gas it, chop it up, suck it out, poison it. Who gives a rip? Right? That's exactly the argument. Because it's the difference between killing and murder. So murder, and this is a complex one. In a court of law today, you have to have something called res mea in Latin, which means evil mind, which means I have to have a type of like spite towards you and the desire to kill you. It's not just a desire to kill you. Because, for example, in warfare, if I'm in a warfare and I have a gun and I'm shooting at my so-called enemy, I have a desire to kill him because I want him to stop. Just hypothetically, and soldiers do. I'm here to kill him. I'm not shooting to get you. Stop doing it. They're aiming to kill, not just injure. But they're exempt. No one considers killing another soldier in war, murder, because they don't have spite in their heart, ideally. That is to say, I'm not shooting this AR, I'm not shooting the gun at you right now because I hate you. Not because you're my enemy. It's because we're at war, and I've been ordered by my commanding officer, and we've declared war against you. And I'm called a soldier. And in your world, you're also called a soldier, and you've also been declared that we're to fight against me. That's very different. So that's why they're exonerated. Even soldiers are never ever they're never considered that. Unless they kill a civilian. Then you've broken the laws of war. Now you've committed murder. And they do get committed. The people in Afghanistan and soldiers, they'll go to life in prison once they found out. That happens before. People go around and kill Afghanistan just to prove a point or scare them, and they go to jail for the rest of their time in America because they've killed someone. That's murder. So that's the difference. So in America, in the court system, we have different layers of homicide: first degree, second degree, third degree. If my tire blows out and hits someone else on the interstate and they die, my car caused their death, but I didn't do it on purpose, and so I'm not going to jail for life. It was an accident. That's like third degree homicide. First degree is when I hated, or despised, and I killed on purpose. And to do that, you got to demonstrate usually intention and plotting, and then motive. But killing is different. For the Christian perspective, same thing. A Christian point of view, you might say murder is like that too. Murder is a kill. I'm not laughing. I'm thinking of movies. In the Christian view, I define murder as an unsanctioned hit. That's what they say in the military. It's an unsanctioned hit. That is to say, in the Bible, if God commands someone dies, it's a sanctioned hit. Other than that, you never have the right to do it. And that's why in the Old Testament they had capital punishment, because it was a sanction that they would believe that God commanded them to, at certain points, judge human beings in this life by physical death. Jesus never said that. But according to the Mosaic Law, apparently, how much they did it, though, we have no evidence for how much they actually did it in the Old Testament era. They wrote about it, but we have no evidence of it ever happening. But still, that's not murder. They would say, you brought that rebellious son out to the gates, that's where the judge, and they got stoned to death. We have no evidence it ever happened, but if it did do happen, they would say, that's not murder because we're following the laws governed by God. But if outside of that, you do not have the right to kill anybody because then you murdered them, God has to sanction it. That's the same thing they would say with the conquest of Joshua and so forth. They would say these are all warfare sanctioned by God. If it's not sanctioned by God, you have murdered. Now, why is that? Because you, as humans, you don't have the very right you need to have, which is you need to be in the office of God to declare who lives or dies. You're playing God, yeah, sure. That's one of the ways they talk about playing God. That God in the office of God, only God in the office of God has certain moral capacities, moral values and duties, you might, or the ability to give out moral values and duties. That's right. Those commands. That's right. Mm-hmm. Good. Anything else about that?
I just had a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't want it to go any farther, but I will.
Uh-oh.
Whoever wins in war, they are in the right then.
So whoever wins in war, they're in the right then.
It's always right.
The one who wins war is always right.
The reason they had the war, they won, so they're right. Whatever reason the war was,
Whatever the reason is, they're right
they were right because they won.
because they won. You're saying that's your view?
No.
Oh. Gotcha. So to you, no, just because they win the battle doesn't mean they're right, but you're saying we're told that because they win the battle, they're right. Yeah, I agree. From a Christian perspective, that's just gibberish. Of course it's not true that whoever wins the war, therefore, they're righteous. That wouldn't make any sense. When people attack people, there's no difference in well, okay, I'm for a long time about that. You can either be a really big bully with a lot of big tanks or a small bully in a school. Either way, being a bully is still a bully. And bullies aren't righteous. They can beat up everybody they want to beat up. They're not righteous. They can win every battle. They're not righteous. So whether they've got tanks or they have a fist, they're being a bully. So yeah. And there's another thing Augustine and others made up called just war theory, and that's, they would say, war can only be righteous or just on a very specific conditions. That's right. But yeah, every side thinks they're righteous. Everybody does. When the Canaanites fought against the Israelites, they were convinced they were doing the right thing. That's what El and Baal commanded them to fight against the Israelites. And the Israelites said, no, Yahweh commands us. Everyone thought it. To this very day, the reason why the Hamas is fighting is because Allah is on our side. Allah wants the Jews to die. Haven't you read the Quran? Have you read the Hadith? Muhammad said, this makes God happy. The Jews are going, no, this doesn't make God happy. God doesn't want people to die innocent. Why'd you do this? I mean, every side thinks they're right. That doesn't mean they're all right, but it means they cannot all be right. It does mean that. That's logic. Someone's wrong. But just because you win does not mean your God's on your side. That's what most people think, though. In the Middle East, they sure think that. My God's bigger, beats your God up. And that's what it's terribly distressing when they lose because they're convinced God is on their side. When the altar, when the Ark of the Covenant was disappeared and beaten, I mean, it was devastating. When the temple fell in AD 70, I mean, how could God let that happen? When the Holocaust happened, many Jews stopped being a Jew, religious Jew. Like, there's no way because God's on our side. And so, therefore, God doesn't exist or this or that. And so it's devastating. I'm going to go ahead.
They put God on trial at Auschwitz.
Oh, God on trial in Auschwitz. Some did. Okay, so pick your rules, follow them. Letter D, another kind of ethic, prescriptive ethic, is called technically we call this teleological or consequentialist ethics. Greek telos means the end or the result of something. Teleological consequentialism. There's one particular form of consequentialism, because the consequence, that's the most popular, and that's called utilitarianism. It's the most popular kind, so we'll spend more time on that. A consequentialist ethicists maintain that actions are not inherently morally immoral, that's deontology, but their consequences are moral or immoral. It's the consequences that determine the moral value of an act. The end justifies the means. If you've ever heard that before or said it, you have been talking to a consequentialist. Point them out in the room. I'm just kidding. I mean, that's fine. I'm just saying, we've done it. Hey, the end justifies, and someone says, no, the end doesn't justify. You're a deontologist. The central principle is an action is morally right if it leads to the best possible outcome for the least bad outcome, when all options might lead to negative results. So you're looking for the best happiness, least bad things. There's some differences between consequentialism and teleology. While both are concerned with outcomes or ends and actions, consequentialism is strictly focused on the results produced by civic actions. Teleological theories, on the other hand, might consider broader ends or purposes such as the fulfillment of human nature or the development of virtues. The end result can be broader, but consequentialists provide a more straightforward method for ethical decision-making. You choose the action that produces the best consequences right now in this moment. Teleological theories, especially like natural law, might require more comprehensive of human nature, purpose, the higher ends of human life, and so forth. Okay, that's in a nutshell. All that to say, we're going to focus on one main one, and that is utilitarianism. We're going to focus on that one because it's the most popular. Utilitarianism is the most common type of consequentialist approach. Early utilitarians based their calculations on hedonism, the belief that pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has intrinsic value. I think that's still the number one thing today for people. Actions which produce the most good for the most people are good, that is, happiness and pleasure. The most good for the most amount of people are good. Those which produce the least amount of good are bad. Good is that which brings pleasure, happiness, or benefit, or the prevention of pain and suffering. Utilitarians argue that we have an extensive negative responsibility. That is, the consequences of our acting and not acting are moral, and we are held responsible for both acting and not acting. Why didn't you do that? You should have done it, and you're guilty if you didn't do it. You should have guaranteed that the most amount of good to the most amount of people came. Utilitarians really focus on the sense of pleasure and happiness and flourishing. Remember, it's because if that role is the most amount of good for the most amount of people is, listen, and I could go on for a long time. I won't. Help me, Lord. And the modern transgenderism discussion, why can't you just say they, them, zed, zig, clown? Why can't you just say that? It makes them happy. How does that hurt them? And secondly, they won't go kill themselves. Why are you not doing the very thing that you are obligated to do? Because it makes the most amount of group of this pre-suicidal group not go kill themselves happy. You are morally responsible not to do whatever it takes to make sure they are happy. That's utilitarianism. You are guilty. You are immoral, not neutral. You are immoral if you do not join as quickly as possible that view. Have you ever heard that before? Okay. Maybe. Well, all that to say, that's the goal. The goal is the most amount of people's happiness all the time. If you don't do something about it, you're wrong. You're immoral. If you do not go and loot the stores and beg forgiveness of thousands of years of how white people have treated black people, you are just as racist and bad as the people who lynched people. You're just as bad as they are. You've got to do what it takes to make sure a whole people group are happy with how they feel towards you. And if not, that's negative responsibility. You are participating. Your silence is participating. I've heard that repeatedly on the news and documentaries and interviews. Your silence, Ms. Participatory, is just as guilty because you have a negative responsibility. That is, what you're not doing means you're not part of the problem. A deontologist says, no, I'm not. A consequentialist says, yeah, you are. Utilitarian says, yes, you are. You have to agree with happiness is the chief goal of them. 2, that happiness like that is their chief goal. 3, that you're responsible for making sure they feel it. Well, it makes me unhappy. It doesn't matter. Your soul unhappiness is not as important as the group's happiness. That's utilitarianism. It doesn't matter if you feel uncomfortable by calling he, she squirrel. It doesn't matter if that makes you feel weird. What matters is that the group feels happy, not you. And if you don't, you're responsible for the group's unhappiness. Do you see that? That's utilitarianism. She said, that's not true. Well, utilitarian says, yes, it is. You have to agree that the right thing to do is to support the happiness of the most amount of people and their flourishing. And if it helps them flourish to think that they're a squirrel, you've got to support that claim. It doesn't matter what you think and feel. That's utilitarianism all day long. That's what that is. What's that? Being a follower? Go along. Well, the following is not utilitarianism as it is you need to do whatever it takes to make the larger group happy. Did God say that? No. I'm just saying this is one of the views. I'm not saying this is what Jesus would say. I'm just trying to, this is a very well-known view in ethics. Yeah.
The pleasures of the 70s ended up being the AIDS epidemic of the 80s. So
Oh.
utilitarianism is very nearsighted.
Okay, we're going there in a second. So you said the nearsightedness of utilitarianism, basically. That's right. I'll give it in a second. That's right. Actually, we'll go ahead in a second. We'll talk because I want to talk about. You just mentioned one of the main problems with it, but it is a view, and Christians can use it in certain times. Sure, Christians sure can. I do all the time in church. All the time in church, I squash my needs and my desires so that Hill Church might do something thrive, or because it fits the general belief of what people are doing here. Is there a difference in the world? Well, utilitarian would say, no. And the what? And the squirrel? And the squirrel, the squirrel analogy. Well, the difference, utilitarian would say there's no difference in that I'm valuing what I perceive as the happiness or pleasure of the group, and I'm squashing my own happiness so the group gets happy. In that sense, that's the case. Then we just might disagree on what makes them happy or they should be happy and that kind of stuff. Right? So if someone's living the way God didn't design to live, we shouldn't judge them, but we shouldn't try to make them happy. I agree with that. I agree with that. I mean, I agree that based on the biblical picture, exactly right. But just that principle of squishing my own happiness for the group is a utilitarian thing. Now, the difference, well, if you don't know, I don't do it because I'm a utilitarian. I do it because of a rule and a virtue ethicist. So, anyway, okay, so good question. Benefits of utilitarianism. So here's some benefits. One is, to some degree, it's intuitive. It makes sense in daily life, like not eating dessert in a greater good of being healthy, right? We do it all the time. Sorry, some of us do that all the time. Some of us have self-control, Brandon. And we go, you know what, I could, but for the greater good of my health, I'm not going to eat that one more apple pie that Becky keeps giving to me, and it's so good. I'm going to shut the whipped cream right now. Tim lives there every day as his wife fills the room with delectables. You know what? I want to make it past my 45th birthday, however you are. So I'm not going to eat that. Stop putting it in my mouth. So part of it's intuitive, right? You have a plan, a goal. That's intuitive. Sure. B, it seems natural that we would want the majority to be happy with the greater good of the world. I think that, sure, intuitively, that makes sense to me. C, it seems egalitarian. Everyone's completely equally valuable and treated the same. No one person outweighs the other. That also, in a Christian, I would say, yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me. I'm not choosing one group per se. Utilitarians always trying to affect the greatest group of people. And they would come back and say back to the squirrel analogy. They would say, I hear what you're saying, utilitarian, David, but that's not the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, because if you support them, it will hurt the whole group of America or the whole group of the city, or you can make arguments that way too. But that would be utilitarian. Then you have to argue who's the greater group here. You have to argue that. The difficulties utilitarian. Here's some struggles. Well, it's difficult / impossible to judge consequences or future events. It's just Sometimes it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen, like probably, and all the times it's just impossible. You have no idea how great or good, how long it's going to last, exactly how it's going to affect. And let's say it makes the squirrel people happy for now. What about in 100 years or 1,000 years? We simply don't know the effects it's going to have forever. The utilitarians don't know that. We don't know the future. We can get pretty close to probably like, if I come home on time, I'll probably make it to the movie on time. That's probable, sure. Yeah, right, right. We can do things like that. I need to stop working so that I can take my wife on a date. There's a greater good. But working is healthy and good. Yeah, but it's a greater good right now. Sure. But in the long term, big picture, sometimes it's just simply impossible to know. We don't know. You saved that baby. You did, but that baby ended up being the next Hitler. We don't know. We just don't know. B, it's difficult to actually live out. Namely, you must always, always calculate every single decision in life in relation to the majority of people's good. An early proponent of utilitarianism, Bentham, introduced the concept of the hedonic calculus, a method for measuring the amount of pleasure or pain generated by different actions. He believed in quantifying pleasure and pain, considering factors like intensity, duration, certainty, and propinquity. That's how close they are. I don't find that persuasive. But you'd have to, every single act, figure out every single thing you ever do. No one does that. I mean, no, I've never met in my... Letter C, there's difficulty in defining every possible good consequence. What about education or land or equality or beauty? All these things are good, basically, to have them, but which one's the most good? Well, I need to go talk to a deontologist for that. These are rules. But consequentialists don't think that way. Utilitarians don't think that way. They just assume we're all going to agree on what the good is. For example, I might say, I think it's not good to support people thinking they're squirrels. I think that's supporting a mental illness. You say, no, it is a good, they don't kill themselves. And I would say, I don't think I'm more responsible for killing themselves. What they do is what so we disagree on what the good is. Letter D, all good consequences are not easy to weigh. Like, what's the greater good, environmentalism or economic growth when we're drilling for oil? If harming one innocent person could somehow lead to greater overall happiness, strict utilitarianism might deem it acceptable. Should I rape that village so that they have a super race and then we can end cancer? They're going to say yes. If I knew for a fact that's what happened, yes, the right thing to do is to go rape them all so we can cure cancer. Go for it. Go do it. If you could determine that, they would say yes, because the end group of the happiness, and the rest of us might go, that strikes me as wrong. They would say is, well, even if it does, you got to stuff that because the greater good is the greater good. Of course, letter E is, do the ends always justify the means? For example, stem cell research requires that you kill the embryo in order for others to benefit of possible cures in certain instances. So does that mean, is it always good? They would say, sure, it's always good. Sure, it's always good. I'm going to stop there because of time, and I'm going to come back next week. We're going to talk about Christianity and utilitarianism. I'm going to give some reflections from the Christian perspective. But before I do, any questions or comments about that? Anything at all? The insurrection. Yeah? The insurrection of that January 6th stuff is related to this. I guess a person could make the argument that that was a necessary thing to do for some other greater good, or that you shouldn't have done it because it caused more harm to the greater ground people. More like a mob. Oh, I don't have a strong opinion about that. Yeah, I'm not sure why that would be ever necessary to do that. I mean, I would have never have done it nor ever supported it. I think Americans don't do that. Sure, yeah, all the talk and nonsense, yeah. Yeah, the way America makes changes is based on voting, not by overturning in mobs or looting, and so that stuff, I fundamentally disagree with that. Yes, Julia, we're almost out. We got 30 seconds.
In the train car dilemma, where it's like you could
Yeah, the train car dilemma.
choose to kill 5 people or switch thing that kills 2 people.
Yeah.
The consequentialist would say switch it.
Yeah, utilitarian would always say kill the least amount of people. If you have a train and it was split off, you're required to kill the 2 versus the 5. A deontologist would say, I have to preserve human life, so I'm not going to, whatever I choose, I'm wrong because I've broken a rule. Utilitarians said, no, you're not wrong at all. You did the right thing. You're not guilty at all for killing the two. Praise God. High five. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.